Hi everybody, Glitter here. I hope you're all doing okay, staying safe, staying healthy, staying happy. Um, what I want to talk about today is a little bit difficult to understand, especially for myself. It's a pretty big topic, and I don't claim to know everything. I've just been kind of reading some philosophy, learning more about this one philosopher in particular, Jean Baudrillard, and I wanted to kind of try and talk through some of these concepts with you guys. A couple days ago, I watched The Matrix, which, if you don't know, is directed by the then Wachowski brothers, now Wachowski sisters, and all of the actors on that set were directed to read Simulacra and the Simulation by Jean Baudrillard. And so that this philosopher's ideas is a lot of where this movie comes from. And I did some reading about Baudrillard and the way he thinks and watched some videos on it before I watched the movie, and I just thought it was so crazy and like really cool to have these concepts applied in a way that feels a little bit more accessible, even though Baudrillard himself tried to distance himself from the movie as much as possible, was not a fan of it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas there that I want to talk about because I'm pretty confused by them, but I also think there's so much relevancy to today. So yeah, let's jump right in. So Baudrillard was born, I believe, in 1929, and a lot of his writing is so prophetic and predicts so much of what we see today. And I guess I'm going to focus on what he calls the hyperreal, which is a large part of his work and his philosophy. And it's a little bit difficult to describe, but I guess in essence it's what is more real than the real. And Baudrillard kind of talks about the real as being okay, so think about the flavor of a banana, the real banana, and then think about banana Laffy Taffy, the artificial flavoring. So the artificial flavoring is hyperreal, more real than the real itself. It's like a simulacra of a thing. Coca-Cola is hyperreal, because it's a flavor that doesn't that was invented by itself. Or if you think about Bed Bath and Beyond, or Bath and Body Works candles, a winter snow walk smell, that's hyperreal. That smell doesn't exist. But yeah, so Baudrillard asks these questions what happens when artificial flavors or synthetic foods replace real foods, real flavors? What happens when perfect pleasure is replaced by pleasure perfectly calculated for the individual's body? And then he kind of theorized, what if we are already here? Is language writing not a form of virtual reality? Are pixels not perfectly calculated to reproduce illusions of what is real? And in that way is really prophetic, because now we see so much reality TV, Facebook, fake news that completely controls our lives. And I guess where I could begin is at the different ways we value objects. So initially, it was theorized that there were two ways. So there's use value, which is the utility of an object, we need a home over our heads, or we need to wash our clothes, we need food, and so for that reason we value housing, we value food, we value a washing machine. And yeah, so that's I think the most authentic way you can value an object. And then the second way it was theorized was exchange value, which has to do with money and the price put on things. So for instance, a diamond can become more expensive than a house, but it's the fetishization of that object that is the exchange value. And Baudrillard argues that before the exchange value, there was real value. So travel, for instance, used to be real. We used to do it because we needed to, but then we started paying for it in that abstracted travel, and so it's no longer real travel. It's more abstract than that. There's like abstract concepts applied to the value of that thing. And then Baudrillard brings up a third value, which is the one that controls our lives now, which is sign value. And so, like, I guess I could compare it to, like, Gucci or Louis Vuitton. Like, those things are valued because the symbol of it symbolizes wealth and luxury, and people want to buy that Gucci purse because it means that they have a certain level of class, which I find really interesting because it's kind of ironic in a way. Like, the consumer buys the Gucci purse at an extreme price in order to walk around with the Gucci sign, which only is just more free advertising for Gucci. And I think about, this YouTube channel or YouTube as a company in general, and how it just set itself up and people provided content for it. I'm providing content for it right now for free, and that's generating revenue for YouTube. And so, like, learning about Baudrillard, learning about his, like, critiques on capitalism, just, like, really make me think about all the ways we are being used. And, sign value is such an extreme manipulator. Going back to the Hyperreal and defining Simulacra, Simulacra, as far as I know, is kind of an imitation of a thing, or an imitation that has no original. And so there's a few types of simulacra. There's the natural imitation, which, think about a painter looking at a tree and reproducing that tree. That's like a natural form of simulacra. And then there's productive copies, which, think about an architect looking at a tree and then maybe making a building inspired by that tree or out of that tree. And then we get to the third one, which is code in simulation, which equals total control. Like, you look at the tree and you put it through an algorithm to find out how you can get the optimal use of the wood and the leaves from that tree and create, like, the ideal bed that you can buy from IKEA. And basically, this total control, this aggregate of code completely controls our world. Like, whole societies are built off polls. Wars are run through computer programs. DNA can be genetically altered. Economic models dictate policy. Just stuff like that. Like, this sign value, this total control, it is everywhere. And I think that's where we get a lot of imagery from the Matrix, with, the green and black code just kind of existing all over our world. Like, we cannot escape the hyperreal. And when Neo puts his hand into the mirrored reflection, it kind of takes over his whole body. I see that as a metaphor for how the hyperreal is all around us. Like, we cannot separate ourselves from it. And the hyperreal has a lot to do with consumerism and capitalism. And, a comparison I found interesting was the comparison of Disneyland, and how the idea that Disneyland exists as this imaginary world to convince us that everything outside of Disneyland is real, when really it's just disguising the fact that the idea of Disneyland, this imaginary dream world, goes far outside of its borders. It leaks out into the greater Los Angeles area and the Americas surrounding it. And we live in a postmodern circus where we eat fake meat, we have fake grass, we use Google Maps, we use Facebook, watch hyperreal pornography, watch reality TV, and there's just no escape from it. And I think that's what scares a lot of people about this kind of thinking, is that nothing that we consume is real, and we're so far away from the real world that we mistake hyperreality for reality. And so I got a little bit ahead of myself. I want to go back to kind of talking about sign value and the way things are manufactured and sold to us, but I will come back to reality TV in a second. Like, he describes a washing machine, and how post-World War II France was in this kind of boom of consumerism. And so now it wasn't just the washing machine that you wanted for its utility, it was a sleek, modernized washing machine that goes with the refrigerator. If you have the refrigerator, then you want the blender with the same name. And he talks about how things are nowadays are so infrequently sold as a unit, just one. You know, if you have the iPhone, you want the iPad. If you have the Gucci bag, you want the wallet. And it's kind of these sign values interacting with each other to sell you more and more things that you don't actually need. And so now going back to reality television, it's such a paradox because you're being told that this is real, like it has reality in the name, but it's like the most hyperreal thing you could get. And he talks about that the cameras as immediately disqualifying a production from being real because with the camera's presence, the subjects are in a way performing for the camera, and you know the editors are cutting it to get the most dramatic response out of the viewer, and the subjects themselves are hyperreal in that the producers are picking them so that hoping to elicit certain scenarios from their personalities and hoping that they will play a certain part. Like in The Bachelorette, there's always someone who will be the antagonist, and that person will never win. In every season, you can identify that person. And so what's interesting about the idea of cameras immediately disqualifying a production from being real is that would suggest that documentaries have the same issue. And something that I find really compelling about Baudrillard's like analysis on television and media is like he talks about historical films like Apocalypse Now or like Chernobyl as being harmful because, you know, I can't remember what actually happened during Vietnam. I wasn't born, but like it feels like in a way I can remember it because of the movies I've seen about Vietnam. And he talks about how movies like Apocalypse Now make the war more real than it ever was, and he even goes so far as to say that the war in Vietnam never happened because no one remembers it the way it actually happened. We only remember it in these super VFX'd images, and we don't with these actors and the perfect shots. Same with Chernobyl. Like in 20 years time, when we recall the historical event, will we remember it actually happening, or will we remember the heavily doctored and perfectly captured images from HBO's series? And like that's just another way that the hyperreal infiltrates our lives. And today, like, I think it's so funny, you know, we have these worries of robots or AI taking over our world, and, you know, this idea of a hyper-technologicalized society or dystopic society that is going to be, like, unsustainable and harmful to us. But the funniest thing is that we are already here. You know, like, nothing is real, and it's all controlled by companies and media. And I mean, what even is real truth? What lies beyond the real, and how can we get back to the real? And should we get back to the real? I mean, I feel like we should, but it's interesting because the one way Baudrillard hypothesized we can get out of this is a return to kind of older civilizations like the indigenous people in America, getting back to what Baudrillard calls symbolic exchange, which is, in essence, I guess, gift giving without expecting anything in return. A huge criticism he had of Marx was that even though Marx is anti-capitalist, it still holds production at the center of its theory. And he says that in order for us to truly escape the hyperreal, we have to get rid of the necessity for production. And he talks about ritual and sacrifice and returning to those ideas, like festivals should be kind of ritualistic, and parties should be on a whim, and you should give gifts to people without expecting anything in return just because you think they'll like it. And we should be able to self-destruct when we want to, or pick up a different hobby every 5 minutes, returning to our kind of like true human eccentricities, I suppose, which I think is so interesting and honestly seems so impossible, which brings up this quote that I had a professor tell me a few years ago, which I think is so relevant to what we're talking about right now, which is it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. I find that so accurate and so sad, because it's like capitalism in our consumer culture is going to kill us. The way we feel like we need to buy things constantly and create so much waste is eventually going to be our downfall. But yeah, it seems so unlikely that we'll be able to find a way out of that before that happens. Like I can honestly just imagine the world bursting into flames before consumer culture dies out. And now I'm kind of getting a little bit away from Baudrillard when I'm talking about consumer culture, but like, I feel like maybe one of the solutions is we just need to fucking like heal ourselves. Like, capitalism needs us to feel so insecure and so inadequate that we are constantly buying things in order to fill some kind of hole. And I don't even know, like, myself what the solution to our apparently incurable insecurities are, but because of them is why it is so easy for companies to just completely use us and take advantage of us. And like, personally myself, like, I don't know what it would take for me to like completely distance myself from consumer culture. Like, is that even possible in our society? Like, would it be regulation? Would it be a social revolution? Can you have one without the other? I don't know, but like the way we are progressing with this like hyperreality is just not sustainable, and it's not a problem that we're going to have to deal with in the future. It is here. It has been here since before we were born, and I find this reading so scary, but also really eye-opening, because it just, I don't know, it's just like, how can everything I know be fake, not real? Yeah. I mean, I guess that's where I'll end this video. Sorry if it's a bit cynical. Baudrillard is a really cynical thinker. But yeah, I mean, I would love to hear what you guys think. I would love to hear what you guys think about The Matrix. I didn't actually really talk about it much, but, if you haven't seen it, you should go see it. Maybe watching this before will create some new insight for it. But yeah, I hope you don't spiral into an existential crisis, like I have been. Yeah. Make sure to like and subscribe and follow my Instagram channel at glitter with 3 R's, and comment below what you think of what I just said. I don't claim to know everything, and the interesting thing about knowledge is like the more you know, the less you feel you know. So like people who know absolutely nothing about a topic sometimes feel like they know the most, but I think it's a good place to be in to feel like you don't know everything or maybe you know nothing, because that means you're actually learning and you're learning about how much there is to know that you don't know. So yeah, don't be discouraged if you feel like you don't know anything. And, keep learning. Love you guys.